Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this June 14, 2015 edition of Nightcast. Our news tonight, we go to some flooding overseas in Georgia. We're talking about Georgia overseas now. There's been a warning over escaped zoo animals.
Scene of utter devastation at what used to be the Tbilisi Zoo. Just to give you an idea how badly this area was flooded, take a look at that rooftop. This is how high the water got. This muddy water that you see below here is where the Tbilisi Zoo had its open enclosures, open air cages for animals such as bears, tigers and lions. And you can see one poor bear there that didn't make it, it drowned. Also, to give you an idea, you can see the top of what used to be the gate covering those gauges. So we were told that this water might be as much as 5-6 meters deep. And over here, you can see all the clearing up is going on because this area was littered with overturned cars and trees that were brought here with the debris, with this mud. And also more corpses there of tigers and other animals that didn't make it. The main question now is how many of those animals might have escaped. We were told by zoo officials that out of 600 animals, more than half are missing. Zoo officials believe that the vast majority of those animals drowned, but also the number of those who might have escaped to the higher grounds in Tbilisi is not clear. And we've heard helicopters kind of patrolling those areas. There are also rescue workers trying to hunt down those animals that might have escaped.
And friends, we have more video on this same story. Let's just go right into it.
It was described as a hellish whirlpool. The floodwater raged through Tbilisi. And at the city's zoo, it rose right to the rooftops. When that water subsided, there was devastation. 3 staff and hundreds of animals had drowned. And now there's a new danger. Dozens of the animals that survived are on the loose. Some were easy to spot, like this bear struggling to safety. And so were the hippos, these vast, powerful creatures swept into the city centre, where squares turned into swamps. One was captured safely with a tranquilizer, but other animals have been shot and killed. The disaster was caused by relentless rain that began last night. Residents swam for their lives as a local river burst its banks. At least 12 people were drowned. All day, rescuers have been scouring the wreckage, hunting for any people still trapped, and for any more wild animals. There are lions, tigers and wolves among those still missing. So residents have been warned to stay indoors, with a hotline to call if they do spot any of the creatures on the loose. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Moscow.
Okay, thank you, Sarah Rainford. That was from Moscow, as you heard there, friends. And we go from floods next to droughts. California lawmakers have ordered farmers to reduce their water consumption, representing the largest cuts in the U.S. state's history. State officials have told more than 100 irrigation districts they must stop pumping supplies from drought-starved rivers. The conservation move has been prompted by the worsening 4-year drought in the state. Peter Bowles reports from Los Angeles.
A deepening crisis for California, barren fields and a growing number of restrictions on water use to try to curb the effects of a relentless drought. Now farmers who've had water rights dating back more than a century are being told to stop pumping from 3 major waterways. The order will affect the rich agricultural area of California's Central Valley. It's the first time in decades that thousands of farmers have been forced to cut back. Some will try to pump water from the ground, but others face financial ruin. Many family farms that grow crops such as apricots and walnuts have no backup supplies. Dried up lakes and fallowed farmland are becoming familiar sights as California struggles to preserve water. Officials say they'll continue to impose new restrictions throughout the summer. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Okay, friends, and let's see. What happened? I thought we switched. Oh, there we go. Okay, my buttons are working correct. I got confused. We go from those couple of stories that relate on our chart from the seals. Those relate to the third seal and the fourth seal. Now, actually, both of those relate to the fourth seal. It really wasn't famine. The fourth seal, there are three elements to that fourth seal, even though the prominent, the most heavily accented one, and mentioned first by Christ, is loimus, meaning disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt even. But also, between the third and fifth seal, Christ said there would be a couple of other things. Seismus meaning seismic activity, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground, commotions in the air such as gale force winds of all kinds, hurricanes, typhoons, tornadoes, etc. Commotions on the ground such as earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, flooding, wildfires, that kind of thing. And drought is a seismic condition as well. And it relates, now that drought would move over a little bit to the third seal, famine, because it's a cause. It can be a cause of famine. Of course, so can things related to war. But again, so can things related to agriculture. Okay, all right, I've covered that point, and our first stories are showing activity, as we have almost every day, that relates to these seals. And Jesus Christ told us when these seals are very active, know that the kingdom of God is near. And he compared that to knowing that summer is near when you see the branches of a tree coming tender and little buds starting to sprout out. Then you know summer's near. He said, likewise, know that the kingdom of God is near when you see these seals become more active. Well, this one related to this next one now is related to the disease epidemic part of. Let's see. Did we just? Yeah. This next one now. We just did the one on the drought, and this next story is related to loimus, disease epidemics. The World Health Organization, WHO, says that South Korea's outbreak of MERS, M-E-R-S, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, is large and complex, and more cases are unfortunately expected. About 140 people have been infected since the start of the outbreak last month. 14 are known to have died. WHO experts are also urging the South Korean government to stay vigilant. The BBC's Jill McGivering reports.
Officials here are on high alert. As lorry drivers come and go, special thermal cameras search out high temperatures, a possible sign of the virus. All part of the battle to stop its spread. A team from the World Health Organization is assessing the crisis. They warn it's not over yet.
Because the outbreak has been large and is complex, more cases should be anticipated.
So far, all new cases link back to hospitals.
So, for example, the practice of seeking care at many different medical facilities, so-called doctor shopping, may have been a contributing factor. Likewise, the custom of having many friends and family members visiting hospitalized patients may have contributed to secondary spread of infection.
But there's widespread public fear. Many people arrived to sit official examinations on Saturday, despite talk of cancelling them. There were strict health measures. Note the face masks, a common sight nowadays. And every student had their temperature checked. No one with a fever was allowed in.
Even though they measure temperatures and urge us to wear masks, I know we can be infected with MERS. That's why I'm very anxious now, and I was really stressed while I was preparing for the exam.
They give out hand sanitizers and face masks, basic protection against MERS, so I'm not that worried.
But thousands of schools remain closed. It's now several weeks since the first case was identified, and there's still little sign of a return to normal life. Jill McGivering, BBC News.
All right, and friends, our next story, while we're on it on the seals, our next story relates to that second seal, the red horse of war, and rumors of war, and just all kind of warlike conduct and activities. A West Yorkshire teenager is believed to have become Britain's youngest ever suicide bomber after reportedly blowing himself up in Iraq. Talha Asmal, 17, was one of 4 suicide bombers who attacked security forces near an oil refinery south of Beji. The Guardian brings this report to us. ISIS social media reports said Asmal, going by the name of Abu Yusuf al-Britani, had taken part in the attack. Tom Simmons reports.
Loving, kind, caring and affable. A family's description of their lost son, last seen heading for Syria, now, they believe, identified as a suicide bomber. They picked him out from these pictures boasting of an attack in northern Iraq, posted on social media accounts connected with Islamic State. Police still haven't confirmed he took part in the attack here in Beji, scene of intense fighting with Islamic State, but his family released a strongly worded statement. They say he was exploited by persons unknown who were hiding behind the anonymity of the World Wide Web. The family said they targeted and befriended Talha, a deliberate and calculated grooming of him. A British Muslim family, they said ISIS did not represent them. Not and never in our name.
It's not Islam, certainly not something that Islam supports. It condemns the actions of organisations like ISIS, and we're hoping that they would learn and they'd come back and realise the mistakes that they've made.
But Talha Asmal went abroad with a friend, Hassan Munshi, on the left here, of whom there is no news. Experts say extremists compete to carry out suicide attacks.
You actually need to register for the suicide operation list, and then your name is called up one day and you get to carry out the perceived honour of attacking the ISF or whoever the target is and killing yourself in Islamic State's name.
In Dewsbury, Talha Asmal's hometown, the questions will continue about how the flow of young men to foreign war zones can be stopped. In the area where he died, there has been continuous bombing by the US-led coalition, and there were more airstrikes today. Tom Simons, BBC News.
Friends, you know, as we do what Jesus Christ encouraged us to do in Luke 21, verse 36, where he instructed us to watch, and he's saying this in the chapter where he's just spent most of the chapter describing the first 4 seals, and the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation, which hasn't started yet, and so that's the next major event in prophecy that'll be coming. And Christ said, you can escape that. He said, if you're watching the first 4 and praying deeply from the bottom of your heart about them, showing care and concern and a Philadelphia kind of attitude, Christ held out a carrot and promised, if you do these things, you do them that you may escape what's to come. And what's to come, the next major thing in prophecy to come, count them down there. After the first 4 seals that are active now, false prophets of all kind and major kinds, especially coming out of Rome, wars and rumors of war all over the world, famines that often resort from war, but also from agricultural situations, both flooding can destroy crops and cause famine, and so can drought. And the fourth seal, the pale horse of disease epidemic primarily, and seismic conditions, and Terrace trouble, just plain trouble. But not the mega trouble of the next seal, and that's the next thing. These first four are active now, but the next seal, the fifth seal, the great tribulation, as Christ described it, a time of trouble that's so great it hasn't been this bad as what's coming since the beginning of the world, no nor ever shall be after, thankfully. But Christ says you can escape that greatest time of trouble if you're watching these first four seals and watching your conduct too, as he mentions in verses 34 and 35, and then verse 36, he says if you're watching and praying deeply from the bottom of your heart about these seals, these first four things that he's described in Luke 21 that relate to these things that are active right now that we described. Now, this next one relates to that first seal, where there's a call for British Muslims to reduce their Ramadan, which begins this week. And Ramadan for them is a time of fasting from sunset. Fasting from sunrise to sunset. Now, there are some of us who do fasting from sunset one evening to sunset the next evening. But the British Muslims, they do it for Ramadan during the daylight hours, from sunrise to sunset. And so in this news story, they're saying that these daylight hours are lasting longer here where they are in Britain than in the Middle East. And some community groups say the longer fasting time could be harmful. Well, many of you who watch this program as I just mentioned, are used to fasting from sunset one evening to sunset the next evening, a whole basically 24-hour period. And that's coming up in the fall season, about 3 months from now. Let's see, we have a few days to go in the third month on God's calendar. We've got all of the fourth month, all of the fifth month, all of the 6 months. Good 3 months. Am I saying that right? You got fourth, fifth, and sixth month. Yeah, where there's no feast days for us. And then the beginning of the seventh month, the first day is the Feast of Trumpets. Now that is definitely a feast day, not a fast day. And then some 10 days later, we have the Day of Atonement. That's an all-day sunset to sunset fast. But many Muslims in the UK say there is no compromise when it comes to Ramadan. We've got this report by Shabnan Mahmood.
During the month of Ramadan, Muslims all over the world fast from sunrise to sunset. This year in Britain, that can mean up to 19 hours without food or drink. That's a struggle for some, says one leading Muslim scholar. He's suggesting a cut in the number of hours of fasting.
Islamic law is about balance and flexibility. And in midsummer, the fasts are too long. We are closer to the North Pole than to the equator. And Muslim jurists for centuries have argued that you can reduce the fasting hours to something like you have in Mecca, 12 to 14, 15, 16 hours maybe, but no longer. And I think that's very sensible, and it's a balanced approach which British Muslims should adopt.
It's Friday prayers at one of London's largest mosques. Many Muslims here and around the country are getting ready for one of the most spiritual months in the Islamic calendar. But for many, though, there's no compromise when it comes to Ramadan.
You get used to it. You see, your body get used to not to eat for so many hours. And Allah helps, you know.
It's going to be difficult, but obviously it's part of our commitment, so we have to do it.
Exactly. I think if you prepare yourselves properly and plan your day, it's possible. And I think we are British Muslims and we're proud of that, and we follow where we are.
In terms of adaptability, I mean, I totally agree with the sentiments expressed, that the human body is an amazing thing and it just adapts to your circumstances.
Fasting is an important part of being a Muslim. Everyone who can is expected to do it. But Britain's long daylight hours make it more of a challenge than in other parts of the world. This year's Ramadan is expected to start on Thursday, dependent on the sighting of the new moon. Shabnan Mahmood, BBC News.
Okay, friends, and like I said, There are many of you who watch this program who will be doing an all-day fast, good 3 months away from now on the Day of Atonement. But, all right, there's that story. I thought that would be of value to you. And it does relate to that first seal, where there are those in religions of this world that do things differently than we understand to do them from God's Word in the Bible, especially Leviticus 23 that lists God's feast days there. All right, this next story, friends, it does relate to a prophecy in the Bible. Some of you will recognize it right away as I tell you that Hillary Clinton has given the first major speech of her 2016 presidential bid, starting what could be a 17-month campaign. The former First Lady and Secretary of State addressed a rally at New York City's Roosevelt Island, speaking of revitalizing the American economy and stopping secret money from big corporations distorting elections. Jan Sopel has this report.
Hillary Rodham Clinton.
On a bright, sunny New York day, Hillary Clinton took to the stage to wild applause from this largely youthful audience, although there was the odd person with grey hair in the crowd. She sought to make herself the enemy of the hedge funds, banks and big corporations, and the friend of ordinary Americans.
America can't succeed unless you succeed. That is why I am running for President of the United States.
She stressed her experience as Secretary of State, standing up to people like President Putin, and she sought to turn a negative, her age, into a positive and unique selling point.
All our presidents come into office looking so vigorous, and then we watch their hair grow grayer and grayer. Well, I may not be the youngest candidate in this race, but I will be the youngest woman president in the history of the United States.
After the failure of 2008, it's as though Hillary Clinton is trying to present herself anew to the American people. Hillary, the humble person. So Hillary Clinton's campaign is up and running, the start of a 17-month-long journey that she hopes will end at the White House. She will face sterner tests than this one. This is home territory, but the crowd here clearly liked what she had to say.
I'm so excited about Hillary as a candidate. Why wouldn't I be?
I'm very excited about today. Today is a wonderful day. It's going to be a kickoff of a historic campaign, and I think that this is a start, of something great.
And then she threw herself into the crowd, shaking hands, kissing supporters, smiling broadly. The arduous political marathon has begun. John Sopel, BBC News, New York.
All right, friends, we wanted to give you that, and there's a verse of Scripture. I mentioned a prophecy does relate to that. It's a prophecy found in Isaiah, chapter 3, Isaiah chapter 3, and it would be verse 12, where it says, "As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead you cause you to err and destroy the way of your paths." All right, friends, our next story. Notice I'm not commenting a whole lot more on that one. This week marks the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo, where British and Prussian forces defeated the French and brought to end not only Napoleon's ambitions to rule Europe, but he brought to end 1,260 years. Let me pull out a moment here. We've got Napoleon on the wall over there. We'll come back and I'll comment more on those kings you see on the back of the wall there in just a moment. So this story very much relates to prophecies in the Bible. With Battle of Waterloo ended a 1,260-year reign, continuous reign of the Holy Roman Empire. Put that to an end. But this story from today's news brings this up for mention because preparations are underway for a reenactment of the Battle of Waterloo. But before that, the Battle of Ligny, which took place 2 days earlier, is being remembered. Tim Allman reports.
Before Waterloo, there was Ligny. Before Napoleon's final defeat, his final victory. Around 1,600 volunteers have set up camp here, the site of a battle between the French and the Prussians that took place 2 days before the main event at Waterloo. Every army needs a general, and this one is no exception. Cue the man himself, or at least a modern-day stand-in. A French lawyer inspecting the troops and perhaps rewriting history just a bit.
La bataille de Napoleon, la bataille de Waterloo.
The Battle of Waterloo plays a role in the fame of Napoleon as a kind of culmination of a martyr, so it's not necessarily a bad memory. In a way, on a point of view of communication and history with a capital H, Napoleon won the Battle of Waterloo.
In every other way, of course, he lost. Waterloo was the crucial defeat that ultimately led to the end of Napoleon's rule and defined the balance of power in Europe for the next century. But at quite a cost, around 50,000 were left dead or wounded. People have come from all over the world for this reenactment, some taking it a little more seriously than others.
To have a message to send the French? Well, it's a very simple message. It will not be easy to take this town. Try.
Further ceremonies and events will be held in the coming days. A chance to remember, to celebrate, and do a spot more dressing up. Tim Allman, BBC News.
All right, thank you, Tim Allman. And friends, let's pull out a little bit here so you can see these pictures over my shoulder. There's a verse in Revelation 17:10. It is quite a verse. That is a verse for our day today. The verse reads like this, 10th verse, chapter 17, Revelation. It says, "And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen." Now, at the time John wrote this on the Isle of Patmos, the 7 kings he's talking about had not even come into existence yet. So he's definitely talking about a time in the future. But the time in the future that he's referring to is a time when he says there will be 7 kings, and at a point in those 7 kings where 5 of them are fallen. And he says, 1 is. So that means the 6th king is active at the prophetic time that he's speaking of, a future prophetic time. Now the 5 that are fallen can be seen on this chart over my shoulder. Let's zoom into it here. Go in a little tighter on, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kings. Now it says 5 are fallen, 1 is. Well, we know, and many biblical students know who those 5 are that are fallen. They start with, in the upper left-hand corner up there, they start with Justinian. And then we move over 1, we go over to Charlemagne. You see this portrait of the Pope crowning Charlemagne. Then we go over to Otto. And then we go over to Charles V. He was the 4th king of these 7. And then we go to the man we were just talking about in this video reenactment of the battle he won at Ligny and the other one that he lost at Waterloo, which had tremendous significance when he lost that battle. As was mentioned, he ended 1,260 years of continuous reign of the Holy Roman Empire. That ended that. It put it in the abyss until, now that occurred. Napoleon reigned between 1804 and 1814. And from the months he started and the month he ended, it was about 9.5 years of his reign. And from the end of that battle, 1814, that ended, as I mentioned, that ended the continuous reign of the Holy Roman Empire. It put the Holy Roman Empire into the abyss, or into the pit, until 1936, when the sixth king of those seven kings, Mussolini, invaded Ethiopia and made the big bold claim that he had restored the Holy Roman Empire. And in fact, he did, and God revealed this through his end-time apostle, Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, that Mussolini, God showed this to him, how Mussolini had made that claim, and Mussolini had the headship for about the same period of time. Napoleon was the fifth king. Mussolini was the sixth king for 9.5 years, from 1936 until he was shot and then hung upside down with his comrades and his mistress on April 28, 1945. And they hung him upside down from the canopy of an Esso gasoline station in Italy. And that ended Mussolini's headship. That ended the sixth headship of the Holy Roman Empire. So that made that verse that we were just reading from Revelation 17, verse 10, that made it present tense between 1936 and 1945. That's very significant for a number of reasons. In Revelation, God tells us that he reveals the seals that he opens and the things related to those seals to show his servants. And he's saying to show also who are his servants. In fact, let's see, let me take that picture back one, because that's our next story. I want to stay with this story for just a moment. In Revelation 17, we see that verse being written present tense for 1936 to 1945, because it says, one is. Now, at this moment in time, post-1945, we're at the part of the verse that says, and one is yet to come, and when he comes, his reign shall last but a short time. So, there's a seventh head to come, and the verse explains there are seven kings. 5 fallen, one is. The one is has now fallen, and so now we're at the point where the one is. We're waiting on the one is to come. Who is the one to come? Well, we don't know yet. He hasn't come yet. And just like when John wrote the verse, he didn't know who the 5 who were fallen were. He didn't know who the one who would be was, because they weren't in existence when he wrote, and he didn't know who the one that was yet to come would be either, because the man hadn't even been born yet who would become that head. All right, that should make sense. And the point of that is this: we're watching for a revision of the Holy Roman Empire, and when that happens, friends, that crown of the Holy Roman Empire that you see pictured here in this picture, it will be worn again for one last time during one last revival of the Holy Roman Empire. It'll be worn by the seventh and final head of that empire. This crown will be placed on that seventh and final head, who the Bible calls a beast prophetically. It'll be placed on his head during a coronation ceremony conducted by the Pope, who is the woman described in Revelation, who always holds these coronation ceremonies. They hold them in Frankfurt, Germany, in the Kaiser's Hall, the Emperor's Hall there, up on the second floor of the Romer building, which was bombed out toward the end of World War II, but rebuilt right after World War II, thanks to the Americans and the Marshall Fund. But during this time of what Christ called great tribulation in Matthew 24, he said it's a time of trouble, so bad, mega trouble, that no trouble like this has ever been so bad or will be so bad as what's coming since the beginning of the world, no, nor ever after shall be, thankfully. But it'll be a great time of martyrdom of God's saints. It'll be the time of round 3 of World War. It'll be the time when those who are doing what Christ said do in Luke 21, verse 36, watching the events that lead up to this great tribulation time, keeping your own conduct in check as well. Both things, not one or the other, both things, Christ said, and you will be accounted worthy to escape. That's what he promises if you're in what he calls a Philadelphia era type attitude, as he describes it in Revelations 2 and 3. And this will also be the time of 2 olive branches going out as God's 2 witnesses. We don't know who they are yet. God will reveal that at the right time and let us know who these men are, and they'll do it through a lot of miracles. But at the time they're doing this, you hope, friends, you will be what Christ said is promised those who watch and pray. In Luke 21:36, you should hope you will be accounted worthy to escape this great tribulation. And I certainly hope those of you watching this program will be doing what Christ instructed us to do there in Luke 21:36. Be watching daily world news and the events that lead up to the coming great tribulation, and obeying God, keeping his weekly Sabbaths, his annual Sabbaths, and more than just observing the 4th command, doing all 10 of the commands. Loving your God and not taking his name in vain, and loving your neighbor, honoring your parents, not stealing from your neighbors, not committing adultery with his wife, or lusting after the things that he has, or lying against your neighbor, bearing false witness, or stealing any of his stuff. You know, those are good laws of how to love God and how to love your fellow man. All right, we've got another story or two to go before we finish this up tonight. UK intelligence agents have been transferred, because Russia and China have access to classified information which reveals how they operate, a senior government source has told the BBC. According to the Sunday Times, today's Sunday Times, Moscow and Beijing have deciphered documents stolen by whistleblower Edward Snowden. The government source told the BBC the countries have information that led to agents being moved or transferred, but added that there was, quote, no evidence any had been harmed. Gordon Carrera has this report.
Edward Snowden fled America with countless secret files. Today there are claims that all those files are now in Russian and Chinese hands, and that British undercover agents have had to be moved. The government refused to comment on that, instead simply restating what it's always said.
Edward Snowden has caused immense damage to the safety and security of the West, and our ability to protect our citizens from the full range of threats and risks that they face.
2 years ago, Edward Snowden turned up first in Hong Kong, part of China, with the secret British and American files he'd taken. From there, he flew to Russia, where he claimed asylum and where he now remains. He's always said that while a few documents have been used for news stories, the rest are secure from foreign spies. But today, the Sunday Times claimed that Russian and Chinese spies have been able to break the codes and access the material.
He will have been interrogated until he's blue in the face, and above all, his material will have been subjected to their very best code breakers.
Over at MI6, they're not confirming or commenting on this story in any way. My understanding, though, is that since Edward Snowden fled 2 years ago, British intelligence has been working under the assumption that the Russians and Chinese might have access to all the files, and that has led, as a precaution, to some undercover operatives being moved. What's being claimed today, though, and not confirmed by anyone in government, is that the Russians and Chinese definitely have access to all the material. Edward Snowden's supporters have argued he's a whistleblower on surveillance, and that governments have tried to discredit him.
The US government may have called Edward Snowden a traitor, but many people in the US and all over the world think that he is a public interest whistleblower.
2 years on, amid more claims, the debate over Edward Snowden's impact shows no sign of abating. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
All right, friends, for our last story tonight, a little bit lighter story. The first spacecraft to land on a comet has renewed its contact with Earth 7 months after running out of power. We've got this very enlightening report coming up from David Schuckman.
One of the most startling sights in space, the strange landscape of a comet seen from closer than ever before. And last November, a tiny lander called Philae was sent to the surface. Touching down was one of the great achievements in exploration. And the emotions at mission control were overwhelming. But then it turned out the lander had bounced into a corner that was too dark for its solar panels. Many assumed the intense cold would destroy the spacecraft, but suddenly it started communicating. A tweet from the mission team announced that against all the odds, it was alive and scientists are thrilled.
We knew there was a chance that the strengthening sun would wake Philae up, but we didn't know for definite. But now it's just like our little lander seems to be awake, poised and ready to do some more exciting work.
This animation shows how the lander was meant to gather data on a flat surface with plenty of sunlight. Instead, it's been hibernating in a much more awkward position, but is now waking up at a really key moment. Down on the surface of the comet, the lander has actually come back to life at the most interesting possible time. Just as this alien world approaches the sun, starts heating up and forming its tail. There's suddenly far more potential for discovery than anyone expected. Jets of gas are blasting off the comet as the sun's rays become stronger, and they could be carrying something remarkable, the chemical ingredients needed for life. The lander will have a ringside seat to spot them. What does this now enable? I spoke to the European Space Agency's chief science advisor.
The location where Philae is should get more active and more material will come up from underneath the surface of the comet and flow past the lander. And that will enable us to get an even better view of what this comet's really made of on the inside.
All the time, the Rosetta spacecraft has been orbiting around the comet as it hurtles through space. Now the lander down on it is working again as well. So after centuries in which comets were either fascinating or even frightening, we might now discover if they helped to get life started. David Schuckman, BBC News.
Friends, isn't it interesting how man can go out and do all these fabulous space explorations and all these have communication all the way from that comet, and yet men can't get along with one another. Well, that's it for this Sunday night report. Friends, God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Monday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy right here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.